Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lake County. I am so happy to see everyone here today this morning. I'm Christy Cleveland and I will be your service leader today. If you are in gallery view, you will be able to see a large group of people. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. I'll begin with a few announcements. This service is being recorded, except for the joys and concerns and the after service discussion. And if you want to see an earlier service, they are available on our YouTube channel, which you can access with the link that is found in your Sunday bulletin or on our website, lakecountyuu.net. The chat box on Zoom is open and you may take some time at this point to enter a joy or concern if you don't wish to say them out loud later. You may also enter a donation in the funding link, which is in the chat box. This afternoon between 3 and 4 o'clock, our Social Justice Committee will be collecting items for the Lake Cares Food Bank and for the Open Door Homeless Shelter. There are lists of those in the December communicator. They are also collecting gift cards for Winn-Dixie for $25 or $50 so that for the Farm Workers Association. And be sure to mark your calendar for next Sunday when Reverend Kathy Schmitz, a retired UU minister, will be our featured speaker. Her message is gifts for the journey. Let's appreciate the journeys we are on and the gifts we already have. And she needs a few individuals from our church to participate in a pageant that she is going to be doing via Zoom. And she needs 3 more individuals or families, households that will participate in a little skit that she tapes ahead of time this week. And it only takes about 10 minutes. My husband and I did one yesterday and it doesn't take long. She has all the words for you and you just have to say a couple lines. So, be courageous and volunteer and give a gift to the church by doing that. Also, next Sunday will be our last service of 2020. We have no service on December 27th. And thanks to all of you who supported the Bing Futch concert, almost $600 was raised for our church, and he gave a wonderful concert. This Thursday, the Board of Trustees meet at 2 o'clock on Zoom, and everyone is welcome to attend. The link is in the service bulletin, and they're going to be discussing some things like the ministerial search and possible land sale and other interesting things. So join in. And does anyone else have any announcements today? Just raise your hand if you do. Carol?
On Wednesday, we will be doing Graceful Aging, a group of us that just get together and talk about topics that pertain to growing older in our current world and previous worlds. And we meet from 1 to 2:30 on Zoom, and the link is in your service announcement. So please come join us. We've got a group of we have a lot of fun and a lot of laughs and a lot of serious discussions. So hope anybody who's interested could join us.
Thank you.
Wednesday, 1 to 2:30 on Zoom.
Anyone else? Okay. Also, there is Tai Chi on Monday at 11 o'clock at the church in person. Today, our guest speaker is Janeane Reagan. Janeane is a member of our congregation. She is a psychologist, a PhD, and mostly retired, but she spends a lot of her time with one of her favorite pastimes, storytelling. And her message today is entitled, Why We Love Stories. And Janeane would like to share the opening words for us.
Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. Native American saying.
Wow. Again, welcome all. Let us remember and let visitors know also who we are. We are a community with dedicated, compassionate leadership that hopes to be known as a thriving, dynamic, liberal, and welcoming congregation that offers sanctuary to our members and the community at large. We will serve as a beacon to open-minded individuals by fostering justice, peace, and equality in all that we do. As Unitarian Universalists, we are a little different than many churches. For example, women participate fully in our community, as demonstrated by the fact that the majority of our leaders are women. Everyone, though, is welcome here, even men. We have no creed or doctrine. Some of us believe there is a God, some of us do not, and some of us are not sure. Here we honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person and every being. We welcome you regardless of your race, sexual orientation, gender preferences, personal or religious background, age or ethnicity. We make our own religious decisions guided by the 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, which can be found in our website or the website of UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association. If you are a first-time visitor or perhaps returning after an absence, and if you feel comfortable doing so, I invite you to raise your hand at the camera and so we can see you, and a member of our tech staff will call on you and you can introduce yourself and tell us what brought you here today. Is anyone interested in doing that? Okay. If you are not receiving our monthly newsletter or weekly bulletin and wish to, or you wish to have someone from the membership committee contact you to learn more about UU and our community here at UUCLC, please call the church office or send an email, or you can actually leave your email in the chat and someone will get back with you. The lighting of our chalice is a practice which connects Unitarian Universalist congregations all over the world. I will light this small chalice as a I know it looks big in your camera, but it's really little. I will light this representing the chalice, the beautiful chalice that is in our building. This flame may remind us of the flame of life and the light in all of our hearts. And you are welcome to join in singing Spirit of Life.
Compassion, set me free.
We make time for those who wish to offer a joy, concern, or sorrow, or to set an intention for the coming days. This portion of our service will not be recorded. Get back here. Oh, I see what I need to do. There. All right. If there is anyone who has not been mentioned that you hold concern for, please feel free to unmute yourself now and name them aloud. And then when you are done, mute yourself again. All may go ahead.
Dee Dee,
Greg.
Paula. Bea.
Ernie.
Debbie,
Valerie. For all those named and for those things that are too tender to speak, we collectively hold them in the light of our compassion and the warmth of our community. Keeping in mind all these concerns that we have heard, we now take a moment for silent reflection. Please feel free to spend the time quietly in whatever state you wish. Meditation, quiet reflection, pondering, enjoying the music or the picture. And the music, beautiful flute music, is our own Pete Condi. Please join me in reaffirming who we are by reciting together our congregational covenant, which is on the screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. It is our practice to give generously to our church as we are able and in keeping with both its meaning in our lives and its impact on the world. We are thankful to all who provide financial support to UUCLC. And in order to continue our virtual services and keep our beautiful buildings safe and protected, and ready for our eventual return, we ask for whatever financial support you are willing to provide. There are multiple ways to do this, which are on your screen. You can also donate from the link in the chat box today. And thank you for your donations. Janeane will take it from here with the meaning of Hanukkah. You need to unmute and start over.
Sorry, I thought I had. The story of Hanukkah. Now, in telling this story, keep in mind that I am a shiksa. A shiksa is a non-Jewish female. It's a slightly derogatory term, and it's probably something my Jewish husband's family said when he brought me home the first time, and they went, "Oh no, another shiksa." So I come to this story more as a visitor than an owner. The word Hanukkah translates as rededication. The rededication of the temple in Jerusalem took place in 139 BCE, but the story really starts hundreds of years before. You see, the land of the Jews was a land beset by constant wars and constant turnovers in the ruling powers. We all remember the ruling powers of the Egyptians because most of us have seen the Ten Commandments. And it was during this time that the Jews were submitted to slavery. But as they coped with the different powers that came into their lands, they were sometimes oppressed by slavery and other times by high taxation. In 174 BCE, the lands were ruled by the Syrian Antiochus IV. And Antiochus IV, not a very nice guy, really wasn't very much of a religious ruler, but he saw religion as a tool. He felt that if he could get everyone in his lands to come under one religious umbrella, that he could rule them more effectively. So he outlawed all the traditions of the Jewish people. He forbade them to keep their Sabbath, to perform circumcision on their male children, and to keep their dietary rules. He even tried to make some of the rabbis, the leaders, eat pork, and when they refused, he cut off their heads. Within the group of the Jews were the Maccabees. And the Maccabees, well, they're described as rebel warriors because they would not give in to the powers that were trying to control their religious freedom. They fought hard against Antiochus's troops, and they were always greatly outnumbered. These wars went on for a good 35 years, with the Maccabees pushing back, and then again, Antiochus's troops, the Syrians, coming in and destroying their temples. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the mercenaries, and they took everything of value there. The other element that made it difficult for the Jews, excuse me, for the Jews to continue their traditions, that was within their own ranks. They had people who felt that they should go along with what the Syrians wanted, that they should give up their religion and worship the pagan idols that the Syrians put in their temple. They even went so far as to tell Antiochus that there was money within those temples that was not being taxed. This was money, much like tithing of today, that was set aside for the maintenance of the temple, but even more so for the poor and the orphans. So when Antiochus found out about this, he raided the temple, took the money, and took the golden menorah where the light was maintained 24 hours a day. And he took most of the special oil that maintained that light. So it wasn't until 174 BCE that the Maccabees were able to push back. I'm sorry, it was 132 BCE, that the Maccabees were able to finally push back Antiochus's troops. They were able to retake Jerusalem and to restore their temple. When they planned for the rededication, they had to build the altar out of lesser metals than the gold because the gold had been stolen. And when they went to put the oil on the altar, they found that they had only enough for one day. But there was a miracle. And that miracle was that that oil burned for 8 days. And that was long enough for them to procure more of this special olive oil. So that is what has brought us to the tradition of Hanukkah, which is the lighting of the 8 candles, one each night for the nights of Hanukkah. And today, Bernie, my husband, is going to light our menorah. We are on the 4th day of Hanukkah today, so he will use the 9th candle, which is on the candelabra. And this is called the shamus. It is the helper candle, and it is the one that's used each night to light the other candles. He will then give us the Hebrew prayer that accompanies the lighting.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kineshanu b'mitzvotav u'b'tzivonu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Okay. Thank you.
And now we'll hear the song, Light One Candle by Peter, Paul, and Mary.
That their light didn't die, and light one candle for the pain they endured when their right to exist was denied. Light one candle for the terrible sacrifice justice and freedom demand. Light one candle for the wisdom to know when the peacemaker's time is at hand. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many never become our own foe, and light one candle for those who are suffering pain we learned so long ago. Light one candle for all we believe in, let anger not tear us apart, and light one candle to bind us together with peace as the song in our heart. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through our love and our dreams. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years.
Why we love stories. Stories are part of the fabric of the human experience. They are woven into our everyday lives, our history, our culture, our religions. And there's no other time of the year that is more devoted to story than this time of year. This is the season of stories. As the days grow shorter and the nights longer, we are drawn indoors and we are drawn inward. So let us look at some of the stories that fill this season. We've just heard the Hanukkah story with its message about the importance of tradition and religious freedom. And soon we will be at the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. It's usually around December 21st or 22nd. And it's associated with the Festival of Lights, which in pagan lore was the night that the great mother goddess gave birth to the new sun, restarting the cycle of the seasons. It is also called Yule, the day of the huge log. The Yule log that is added to the bonfire around which everyone would dance and sing to awaken the sun from its long winter sleep. And many stories have grown out of this celebration of light and rebirth. The Christmas story, the story of the couple, Joseph and Mary, who traveled to Bethlehem to pay the required taxes, even though Mary was very near her due date. With no room in the innkeeper could only give them a space in the stable. But the special birth, though in a lowly manger, was surrounded by both great mystery, rejoicing, and renewed hope for peace in this earth. Within our Christmas traditions of the past few centuries, we see bits and pieces of the festivals that went before it, like the Yule log, the lights, and the tree, the greenery that we spread around. History tells us that Emperor Constantine in the year 336 AD placed the celebration of Christ's birthday on December 25th, even though it is more likely that Jesus was born in the spring or early summer, because that is when the taxation was due and shepherds were actually in the hills. Constantine was trying to make Christianity, excuse me, Constantine was trying to make Christianity the religion of all of his lands. Some historians claim he was trying to combine Christianity and Christian events with that of the pagans in order to bring them into the Christian fold. That is why we have parts of the pagan rituals still with us. Of course, this is the Christmas story of the Bible and the basis of the Christian celebration. The more secular side of Christmas, which has evolved in modern times, gives us stories like The Grinch That Stole Christmas, Elf, Miracle on 34th Street, just to mention a few. In late December, Kwanzaa is celebrated as a recognition of African American heritage. Created in 1966, yes, just 54 years ago, by a California state professor of African studies, Kwanzaa was an attempt to bring the Black community together after the Watts riots. There's no core story for Kwanzaa, but the telling of stories from Africa is a central part of this celebration, along with the traditional music, dance, and song. In the words of Lisa Cron, author of Wired for Story, story, as it turns out, was crucial to our evolution, more so than opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs let us hang on. Story told us what to hang on to. So what is there about our evolved brains that draws us to stories? Well, one feature of our brain that has developed is that we are excellent predictors of what will happen next. A function that has helped us survive and that we just love to use. We love to figure things out, but we don't like to be confused, says Cron. Enough of that in the real world. Therefore, a good story, one that draws us in, Well, it holds our interest because it has focus. She goes on to say that there are three elements that must work together in unison to maintain focus and to create a good story. The first is the protagonist, the main character or characters of the story who makes up the key decisions and experiences the consequences of those decisions. The protagonist must have a goal, and that goal must be clear to the reader at some point, even if it's not always clear to the character themselves. And most important is the identification of what must be overcome in order to reach that goal. Without a goal and a struggle to attain that goal, there's no meaning, there's no story. Now, the protagonist can be a person, it can be a group, it can be an animal, like Black Beauty. So let's look at our seasonal stories in light of the protagonist. In Hanukkah, the protagonist is the Maccabee people. What is their goal? Well, their goal is to gain freedom to practice their religion. And the barriers, they're badly outnumbered by the Syrians, and they have traitors within their own ranks. The Christmas story, the birth of Jesus, the protagonist is the couple, Mary and Joseph. What are their goals? To be compliant with the taxation rules of the land, and to bring their child safely into the world, not to mention find a way of coping with all the hoopla that has surrounded both the pregnancy and the birth of this special child. What must they overcome? Well, lack of housing, the cold, strangers showing up, unusual light in the sky, and keeping a trust in their God that all will be well. Well, then there's Rudolph. Okay. Now, he's the protagonist, and what did he want? Well, he kind of wanted to belong, didn't he? What challenges stood in his way? Well, things like discrimination and prejudice, not to mention nasty reindeer. Stories allow us to extend our experience, to walk in someone else's shoes, to feel what they feel. Recent functional MRI studies, functional MRIs being the ones that show us what's happening in our brain in now time, these studies have shown that people reading a short story actually have parts of their brain that light up in the same pattern that it would if they were having that same experience in reality. So we would have guessed that, right? So what's the big deal? Well, the authors of this study point out that when we read a story and really understand it, we create a mental simulation of the events described in the story. The details of the text are then integrated into our own memories and into our own knowledge, and they give us a true personal experience. Specialized cells in our brain called mirror neurons, the ones that allow us to learn from the actions of others right from infancy, make it possible for us to learn from story as well as real life. Thus, story is not a passive activity. We learn, we try out, we build new brain connections, much as we do in real life. We get practice dealing with conflicts between goals, with setbacks, and with strong emotional states. All of this is accomplished through our connection with the protagonist. If we don't connect to the protagonist, none of this happens. The second element, says Krohn, is theme. What does the story say about human nature? This is never stated outright in a good story. It is implied, but it's the point of the story. A classic example is Gone with the Wind, Margaret Mitchell's 1936 Civil War novel. I'm sure many of you have read it or at least seen the movie. The theme here, according to Mitchell, is survival. The burning question of what makes some people able to continue through catastrophe and loss while others just go under. Scarlett survives through her stubbornness and her gumption. But the question remains until the end, will she ever recognize what is really in her own best interest? Will she figure out who really loves her? Some of the most common themes are, well, things like, will good triumph over evil? And we think of Star Wars, Darth Vader versus the Jedi, or those many murder mysteries and detective novels that we all love. Will the good guys catch the bad guys and bring them to justice? And of course, the theme, can love win out in the end? And I always think of the classic Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen as the best example of that. So what are the themes in our seasonal stories? Think about Hanukkah. Think about Christmas, even Rudolph. This might make good fodder for our discussion later. The third element, according to Cron, is the plot. The events that force the protagonist to deal with those issues that stand between him, her, or them and their goal. I come back to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, because here, misunderstandings, bad timing, cultural imperatives, other people's agendas, and the main character's own pride and prejudice repeatedly block Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Darcy from seeing the spark that has been ignited between them. If you have not read that book or seen the 2005 movie, be sure to do it. There's a reason why it's a classic. So again, what are the events in our holiday stories, the twists and turns that bring our protagonists to their final conclusions? Think for a moment about also your favorite stories. Maybe in the form of a book, a movie, a TV show, or maybe stories that were told in your family. Who is the protagonist? What are their goals? What's the theme? And how does the plot force them to deal with those issues? We're not used to looking at our favorite stories that way, but it can be a very, very interesting process and often educational. In addition to giving us a wider range of experience, our attraction to story also comes from the fact that story gives us, well, a little break from the complexity and the very messiness of real life. Award-winning novelist Julian Barnes puts it this way: books say, she did this because, while life says, she did this. Books are where things are explained to us. Life is where they aren't. In stories, things have to make sense. In life, not so much. We welcome an escape to this simpler world where only relevant details are included. Another aspect of our spectacular human brains that draws us into story is that we are perpetual cause and effect hunters. In every aspect of our lives, we look for what action leads to what consequence. That is how we learn, how we have survived as a species all these many years. We don't always get it on the first try, but our brains are set up to make good use of repetition, and stories give us that practice. Have you ever wondered why your child or your grandchild wanted you to read the same story over and over again? Like, how many times can you read Goodnight Moon or The Ugly Duckling before you just wish they'd move on to another book? Well, several factors are at play here. Brian Boyd, author of excuse me. Brian Boyd, author of On the Origin of Story, points out that story existed as our school long before there was school. After thousands of generations of stories, our sympathetic imaginations have expanded, and we cooperate on a wider and wider scale. In other words, stories have helped us to live together. Neuroscience supports the idea that stories play an important role in the development of empathy. Empathy is something that is wired into our brains, but it has to be activated. So a story that our grandchild requests over and over may start out filling their developmental need to learn to match words with pictures. But that same story may be the place where that child is learning about concepts and relationships just a few months later, learning things like compassion and cooperation and communication. As an adult, we experience the children's stories the same each time, but the child whose brain is at its peak of learning is experiencing it quite differently. We adults can also experience some of that when we revisit favorite stories or movies, each time understanding it a little deeper. Because the other factors that bring us back to our favorite stories is the brain chemistry this story affects. When we feel a connection with the characters in a story, our brains release a surge of a hormone called oxytocin, often referred to as the love hormone because it activates that mother and child bonding at childbirth. Plus, it is the reason why those special feelings occur when we enter a new romantic relationship. Oxytocin is all about connection, and high oxytocin levels just plain feel good. Favorite stories become paired with that feeling good. The other brain chemical that plays a part in our use of stories is dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical that activates our pleasure center and, like oxytocin, is related not just to the facts of the story, but also to the feelings that we experience in the stories. Dopamine also plays a very important role in how we learn and what we remember. So this brings us to the puzzle of, then why do we like scary stories? Particularly, why are young people so drawn to them? The chemistry here is more like adrenaline, but dopamine is also involved. Researcher Matthias Klassen claims that we've evolved to fear the monstrous, to be very weary of large, unknown, life-threatening forces. In art, which includes story, we can play with these things in a way that allows us to feel the intensity of the horror, but in safe mode, he says, detached from the real consequences. In stories, we play with eventualities that may put us through a lot of intense negative feelings. Say, in horror films or tragedies as intense as Psycho or King Lear, but we come out feeling richer. We've lived to the fullest. We've tested ourselves in these environments, and those tests can carry over into our real life experiences. Now, there's also an interesting intersection of story and history. It has been said that history is really a few facts cemented together by imagination, creativity, biases of the person writing it. We know that even witnesses to the same event see, hear, and remember the events quite differently. And most of the writers of history just weren't there at the time anyway. Consequently, as new facts emerge, the stories of history must often be rewritten. We have seen much of that in recent years as we have considered the stories in our country's history, such as Columbus's discovery of America and the first Thanksgiving. Columbus has been celebrated as the hero who discovered America, but there are numerous other theories about who really was the first. And it has become fairly clear that Columbus never set foot on what is US soil, but spent his time in the Bahamas, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. While he is still credited with creating the bridge between the old world and the new world, he was not the hero or even a very nice guy. His own diaries documented his enslavement of the Taino people which ultimately led to their near extinction from infectious diseases. David Silverman, author of This Land is Their Land, confronts the many myths that make up our beloved story of Thanksgiving. First of all, the travelers on the Mayflower were not the first Europeans to interact with the Wampanoag Indians. Slave raiding and disease transmission had started long before 1620. The leaders of the Wampanoag, they were not being friendly. They were seeking an alliance to protect their tribe from the raiding Narragansett tribes. Thanksgiving was never a holiday until Lincoln made it so in 1863 in an effort to foster unity during the Civil War. And there's one last thing that I really kind of hate to have to share with you, and that is that there's no evidence that there were turkeys in the area of Plymouth Colony. So the first Thanksgiving certainly didn't have a turkey. Oh well. These changes come with a certain sense of loss when we must let go of stories around which we have built so much tradition. We hope we can hang on to the good parts, the coming together, the taking the time to be thankful. But future generations may not be as tied to these stories as we are. There's one last story to be considered, the most important story of all, and that is your story, our own stories. Most of us attending this service today have a lot of pages in that story that lies between the book cover of our birth and our death. In a recent interview by New York Times book critic Makitu Kakatoni, former President Barack Obama talked about his recent autobiography, A Promised Land, which documented his improbable journey from outsider to White House and to his first 2 years of the presidency. Kakatuni says that in this latest book, it attests to Mr. Obama's own storytelling powers and to his belief that in these divided times, as Mr. Obama says, storytelling and literature are more important than ever, that we need to explain to each other who we are and where we're going. Mr. Obama went on to say that storytelling plays a vital role as a tool of radical empathy to remind people of what we have in common, the shared dreams, the frustrations, and the losses of daily life that exist beneath the political divisions. While you may not think that the story of your own life is important or interesting, think how totally unique each one of our stories really is. Telling our own story, stepping back and looking at that story in terms of ourselves as the protagonist who has made a lifetime of decisions, dealt with a myriad of consequences, overcome both big and small hurdles to reach our goals and to arrive here and now. So during this holiday season, consider sharing your story with yourself, your family, and with your friends. We are each a story of survival and triumph. This next song is one that may be familiar to many of you. It's called The Holly and the Ivy. It's an English Christmas carol, but its origin is as a Celtic folk song celebrating the solstice. The symbolism, the holly, represents the masculine and the ivy, the feminine. Both are evergreens, and in England, they are honored because they resist the cold of winter, and their presence is there to usher in the fertility of the coming spring. But sometime in the mid-1800s, this song was adopted as a Christian carol, with the holly now representing the crown of the newborn king and the white blossom of the ivy as the purity of Mary. The melody was retained as well as some of the words, And as you listen and read the words, look at the ways in which these two traditions are represented in this lovely piece. Kristen will have it up soon.
The holly and the ivy, when they are both grown, of all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. Oh, the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry harp, sweet singing in the choir. The holly bears a blossom as white as lily flower, and Mary bore sweet Jesus Christ to be our sweet Savior. Oh, the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry harp, sweet singing in the choir. The holly bears a berry as red as any flower, and Mary bore sweet Jesus Christ on Christmas Day in the morn. On the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry harp, sweet singing in the choir. The holly bears a prickle as sharp as any thorn, and Mary bore sweet Jesus Christ on Christmas Day in the morn. The holly bears a bark as bitter as any gall, and Mary bore sweet Jesus Christ for to redeem us all. On the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry harp, sweet singing in the choir. The holly and the ivy now both are full and grown, all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. Oh, the rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry harp, sweet singing in the choir.
People of all faiths understand the power of storytelling. We know that the meaning of our traditions are often best conveyed not by theological statements or scholarly arguments, but by telling stories. Through storytelling, the other becomes real, human, knowable. The barriers between seemingly separate individuals are erased. Stories can open our hearts in a way that few things can. Rabbi Mark Novak.
I will now extinguish our chalice as I share the words of Martha Munson. We extinguish this chalice, here that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again. Now let's close the service as we weave together a fabric of unity and love. You are invited to go into gallery view to get the full effect and raise your hands as if you are holding hands with the people next to you and join us in singing Weave.